I'd love to coach them and love to help them in any way I can,
Yeah. Okay. So David, we're going to swing it over to you. I'm going to ask you the question directly. Was the kid who's in the wrong in this situation?
You're putting me in a tough spot, man.
Oh yeah.
But I kind of go along with Chris on this one, obviously, and I feel like it's a safe bet. But
No.
all that to say, kind of like the reaction responses of these things. Like I feel like there's a lot of assumptions that are being built, and assumptions. Like one of the things that I've always been told and given advice of is like assumptions are cancer.
Okay.
They're cancerous in the sense that like they can build on top of things, and then rumors spread around, and people get hurt. And so, I mean, man, I feel bad for this kid, honestly, 100%.
Yeah.
And just jumping into this conversation, just honestly reading about this earlier today, and man, I don't have too much of an opinion, but just people are just starting to call this
Chelsey,
shit out.
what are you thinking?
So what I'm thinking is way back to my college days, but even further, my high school days. I love a good protest. I mean, I am the first to love get my picket sign out, and especially a good pro-life protest. These are impassioned people who are showing up to express what they just sincerely believe in and they're excited about, and no matter which side they were on, the pro-life marchers, who is the other group that was there? The
Black Hebrew
Israelites. They're equally as impassioned. So I think, emotions are flowing and they get in there and then everyone just starts antagonizing each other.
Okay.
And that, I think, is it safe to say option C is that they're all wrong?
Okay.
Like not A is the boys, B is the elderly gentleman, Mr. Phillips, and then C is everybody needs to quit antagonizing each other. These are kids. They're going to be idiots. It does appear disrespectful to me, the kid standing in the elder man's face. That's disrespectful. He's got a smirk. I don't think it's menacing or threatening, but it is disrespectful. But, maybe he was antagonized. I don't really know what happened. At the end of the day, no one seems to appear to be that respectful to each other. There were racial slurs being thrown at the boys, derogatory comments made at the boys. And I really don't think anyone's deserving of any of that. And to me, the problem with this is it takes away from the pro-life march, March for Life. Now we're talking about that instead of the millions and hundreds of thousands of children lives that have been lost over the last year and years. So, that's what the discussion should be about. Of course, the media is going to, want to make a big deal out of a nothing burger.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things because this Covington Catholic school, Chris, it's fascinating because they, even in their pledge, one of the reports I read, they say one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, born and unborn. So pro-life issue at this Catholic school is pretty significant to the extent that they even have an addendum onto the Pledge of Allegiance. And so help us to understand then, a hot take right now from you. Who is in the wrong in this?
Yeah, that's a tough situation to look at. I, as an adult, I'm a little saddened, that group was, calling those kids names and stuff. And, so that's number one for me is I feel like I'm with Chelsey. I think everybody can own up. I think that's the healthy ways. Everybody owns up. Okay, what was my part in this thing? You look at the Black Hebrew Israelites, obviously antagonizing, cussing. If I were to do that, I'd be gone. I'd lose my job. I'd be so much trouble. People would come after me. So these guys are doing that. And then it's like the media. There's responsibility in the media cutting. This just showing what they want to show. Then of course the students could have. Again, they're there waiting for their buses. They're chanting. They're having fun. The march is over, type of thing. So, how could they have responded better? That's something that I would try to coach them on and say, okay, man, I know you tried the best you could, but how could you have done better?
Yeah. I'm and again, maybe I'm just projecting. So, David, we're going to swing over to you right now. Maybe I'm just projecting right now, but I know that if I stared down an elderly gentleman like that, and I know that there have been Shapiros of the world, and there's a couple of other individuals that have said that the boy did nothing wrong in this instance. I know that if I stared down an old man like that, my papa my papa would take me out.
Right.
That would not be a good situation.
Yeah, agreed.
And again, I'm not trying to ascribe motive to him. And here, I think we're being sold a bill of goods by the larger narratives right now. So the last thing I want our listeners to hear is to say that I think it's justified some of the reactions that have come by placing the blame on these boys. I don't think it's right that there's individuals that are doxing these kids right now, airing all this personal information. I'm not for the idea of them shaming them. I'm not for the idea of expelling them from school. I'm just saying that my parents, if my grandparents, anybody in my family saw me staring at an old man like that, they wear my butt out, because they would not spare the rod in that instance. So help me. Is that right? Am I crazy in that assessment?
No, you're 100%.
Okay.
Man.
Okay, so we've got that, but then I'm Chelsey, and we'll have to get to this maybe a little bit after break. This is frustrating because again, we're seeing another media overreaction to this, where it is giving us more ammo in our chamber to recognize that we just can't trust the media right now.
Well, I have a theory on that.
Okay,
and it's a short theory,
okay,
and that is when the media sees something that's going to be excitable, they just sensationalize it and they jump on it because they are in a Netflix world where they know everyone's about to go switch over to their Netflix accounts and binge watch Friends. Okay, so they're just trying to keep everyone's attention. If something's going to fire people up, they're going to take it a mile when it really only gives about an inch. And I think it's boring. I mean, I'm over the story. I found out about 5 minutes ago, and I'm done talking about it because, I mean, there's not much to talk about.
Yeah. And so there's actually a great article that we'll get to right here in a second in National Review. Michael Daugherty put out this great piece that feels like we're just living in this type of cycle. And we're going to talk about that, though. But we got to take a break, and we'll be back, though, right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. This is the Millennial Roundtable on this National Shelfie Day. National Shelfie Day. And so just so you know, you can get on our Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we want to encourage you. We had a little bit of technical difficulty a little earlier. And so the Facebook feed was messing up. But we want to encourage you to jump on facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can give your question or comment during that time. Or you can post a picture of your shelfie. Yes, that's right, Chelsey, your shelfie, because it's National Shelfie Day. And so you've heard of the selfie, obviously, you taking a picture with your phone, but there's also the shelfie, which is taking a picture of your shelf.
Wow.
See? It's this is the deep things of the interwebs.
I think this is like a perfect example of the reason I don't have Twitter. I'm like, I just don't need to know.
No, but you do have the daily briefing, and you can get the daily. No,
true.
I'm just kidding. So please feel free to share your picture of your shelfie on our Facebook page. We'd love to see that. I'll post mine here shortly during one of these breaks. But we have been talking about the Covington Catholic School controversy, I guess you could say. And one of the things that I wanted to bring up for this next little segment is a great little piece that I read on National Review this morning. And it was Michael Dougherty was kind of likened this instant to daily scripture reading. And so he utilized the kind of the framework of daily scripture reading, of this idea that we just kind of build in these frameworks of there's certain prayers that in the liturgical calendar, there's certain prayers that we pray, there's certain stories that we read, that we begin to familiarize ourselves and live vicariously through these stories. We see ourselves as the Samaritan in one moment. We see ourselves as Lazarus in the next moment. And we begin to live into these frames. And then, and what Dougherty suggests, and I think was such a brilliant point, is that it seems as though that even though Americans are going to church less, what we're living into is a type of like a social justice. I don't want to use the word social justice. We're living into this world in which it's just a calendar of controversy after controversy after controversy, and we're placing this racist controversy here, and we're placing this injustice controversy here, and we're placing this elitist controversy here, and we're placing this climate change controversy here. And so we're just living in a world of we're constantly in outrage. We're constantly find ourselves in the midst of just all this chaos right now. And does it feel like that to you, Crit? Like it seems as though we're just moving from scandal to scandals to scandal, outrage to outrage to outrage. And it just becomes very exhausting after a while.
Big time. And it's looking at young people, a lot of them, they're just not even listening to the news. They're not jumping on these things. They're just trying to, really be passionate about stuff, trying to get to school, trying to get to college. But it feels like, obviously just division, people really intentionally trying to divide and trying to stir controversy, man. So it's so important to understand the truth and, again, not to react and to respond in love. And if you make a mistake, then great, it's part of life. Then own up and apologize and let's move forward.
Yeah. So Chelsey, help us. You find yourself in an industry, I know we're subject to a lot of attention, I guess you could say, and has been given what was once an admired aspect and a principle that was worth enshrining in the founding is now just seen as a license to bigotry and discrimination. I'm talking about her at First Liberty. She's just such a champion and advocate for religious liberty issues. And so how have you managed to deal with, just constantly being subject to mischaracterization, constantly being subject to type of living in the midst of the scandal?
Right. Well, I think really what you said, Chris, is at the heart of it is that truth will prevail. And at the end of the day, my clients are fired for doing things like praying at work or being told by government officials they can't build a mosque or build a synagogue, or that they have to get a permit for 20 people to meet for a Bible study on the weekends. Wow. Or I have a client, for instance, the Haugies out of Virginia, were given an eviction notice for hosting a Bible study in their apartment complex. So when you start looking at these instances and the type of clients I'm representing, the truth is they're really good people, and they're just trying to go about their lives, living out their faith as best as they can. And the truth is that faith is an integral part of not only their identity and who they are, but it motivates everything from the way they act to the way they work, to the way they teach, to the way they go to school and learn. Faith really motivates all of that. And I think that the secular left is who I predominantly deal with as opposition. So I'm going to just characterize them together, lump all those guys together. They don't understand that. They fundamentally think that, I think that's faith. They use the phrase freedom to worship. Yeah. Well, you worship in your home. Well, my clients aren't allowed to worship in their home, but per se, you're allowed to worship in your home and at church and in the pews, but we don't want to hear it in the public realm. It doesn't belong in the public realm. And that's just not the truth. The First Amendment allows us freedom of expression, free exercise. Is the phrase that the First Amendment uses. And so it's a much broader protection. And how I really deal with it is I get off Twitter. I mean, I got so many death threats that I literally got off Twitter. And now they just send me letters to work. So yeah, but the truth is there's a lot of hate out there. And as much as there are like lies perpetuated against my clients and about who they are, I'll never repeat those words that you said, because that's not the clients I know and who I know them to be. Even the clients, my Baker clients, who I think are a really great example of the biggest type of controversy you can imagine. If you were to meet them, they are the most loving people, and they're just trying to do the best they can by their faith and trying to be faithful. And I think that that's the truth, and that's the truth I'll always talk about. And the other side can be frustrated with it, but I would defend their right to their beliefs, and I would defend their right to their speech. I represent anyone of any faith, so I have Muslim clients, I have Islamic clients. I mean, I would represent anyone, and so. That's the truth. Is it's an intellectual honesty that it takes to say, regardless of the view, I would defend it. And I wish that was the same really consideration given to my clients.
And it's like the classic liberal, not the lowercase liberal, but classic liberalism from Voltaire, right? I might not agree with what you say, but I'll defend your right to be able to say it. Exactly. Which I think is just something that we're losing right now. And so, David, help us to understand, especially from a Christian perspective, what Chelsey's alluded to is this idea that individuals have the opportunity, they have the right to be able to work out their faith. And one of the ways that we're having to work out our faith right now is in this outrage culture where we're living into controversy after controversy after controversy. We've had the term compassion fatigue that we're living in right now. How is a Christian supposed to respond in this type of cycle whereby it seems like there's very little good news, but there's always this bombastic news that's being placed before us?
Yeah, so my thoughts about this is, first of all, that's amazing that you, Chelsey, that you're representing like people of all faith, and that is so loving. I think that's exactly what we need to do, and we lead by serving and loving all people, not just like, oh, you're a Christian, so I'm going to serve you, only you. That's just dividing people. And the fact is, if we as believers believe that, God created all men and women, we have to love them all the same, no matter what. And that is exactly what Christianity, living that out is. It's loving. It's loving because God is love, right? 100%, I think serving, loving, and just leading in such a way, and just not saying I'm better than you, but it's just stepping into that and accepting that responsibility, right? And just taking ownership of that.
Yeah, it reminds me, because maybe we'll get into a little bit of hot water right now, but we'll do it during this hour instead. So the controversy that flared up earlier this week with Lady Gaga and Vice President Pence. Did anyone see that?
Oh, Lordy, did I see that? Yes.
So, I'm going to have to go there because it's the Millennial Roundtable. I'm giving free rein on this. And now Kirby is rolling around right now, like getting into his car and trying to get back to the studio as fast as
possible. Too late, Kirby. You'll never make it in time.
And so I don't know if you guys heard this or not, but like Lady Gaga took some time out of her concert to castigate and to just be able to just be very antagonistic and be very harsh towards Mike Pence. Wow. Gaga grew up in an Italian Catholic school, Italian Catholic family, has even been born this way. She says that God makes no mistakes, so she is very. She claims to follow Jesus, and then she would go on her stage and use a portion of her concert to say that my God is not exclusivist, my God is all welcoming, and just be very harsh towards Mike Pence, our vice president, because of the news story that came out last week that his wife, Miss Pence, was going to work at a Christian school to teach art, like what she had done
shockingly adheres to Christian views. Yeah, I get really fired up about this.
That Christians would believe what the Bible says. That's just crazy. So how do we help me to understand this, Chelsey? How are we to think through this?
Well, first, you're allowed to be irritated. For step one, irritation at Lady Gaga. It's the ultimate hypocrisy, though. It really is, for her to say, I'm a Christian. I'm somehow an authority on all things Christian. I get to speak on behalf of God and the entire faith. Yeah. And then to judge and call someone else out for his sincerely held views. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing more hypocritical than that. And that's the first thought that popped in my head, which is she's not some authority. Yeah. And that any religious school has the right to teach its doctrine. Yeah. You don't have to go to that school. It's a private school for a reason. They can, I was thinking about this too, because I think Quakers don't send their kids to public school. Yeah. So they're not taking IT classes or all of, they're learning, they're being indoctrinated in their faith. That's what religious private schools are for. So if you don't like their doctrine, just don't send your kids there. Yeah, right. It's that simple.
One of the unique things here in America is we can start our own school. Right. You have the opportunity to not necessarily...
Or a charter school, North Hills Preparatory. I'm looking at you.
You can do that. So, okay, we've got to go to a break right now, but when we come back from the break, I will probably not talk anymore about Lady Gaga, because I can probably see no one wants to talk about that. And then we'll kind of transition into statues. So we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by David Fraga, Chris Avila, Chelsey, Youman. We're so grateful that you all have decided to join us today on this Millennial Roundtable. We've been talking a little bit about the Catholic controversy. Specifically, we've been talking about what's been happening, what happened on Friday, that the viral video of the high school and then ended up getting publicized and went viral on Saturday, to where we saw a fuller video on Sunday, and to now we're finding our way back into the middle of it now with Savannah Guthrie of Today's Show that's interviewed him. And so talking a little bit about that, then we transitioned a little bit to talk about Lady Gaga and in a strange twist, because she called out Vice President Pence for one. She called out our president for open up the government already, don't build the wall. Being she said that our God is not exclusivist; it's very inclusive. And then two, she went after Vice President Pence, and it seems as though Chelsey. And here's where I want to be, and this is where you and I kind of go back and forth, is because I hate to paint with such a broad brush, but right now I'm starting to hear more and more themes on we'll say the political left, that's just very antagonistic towards religious belief, or I don't want to say religious belief.
Oh, you're just now starting to notice.
I don't. No.
You're like a few years behind, buddy. Catch you up.
I'm just trying to be optimistic right now. I'm trying to think of the best, and so it's becoming more and more loud of the antagonistic spirit towards Christianity in particular.
Right.
I'll say historic, even Orthodox Christianity.
Okay, so I think
how much nuance I put into that.
Yeah. Okay. You just okay. We're gonna move forward. So I'll just throw a few statistics at you, because I know you like statistics. And I think in my line of work, like when I go to speaking engagements, which I love doing, I love talking to people about our issues. The number one thing people say is, "I had no clue." Where has this been? Why didn't I know about this? And the truth is, like, the media is not going to cover our issues. Okay. The media just does not want to talk about and does not think that it's very sympathetic for a Christian to face hostility and animosity. Okay, so you're not really going to hear it in mainstream media unless you're following us, firstliberty.org, sign up for our news flash. You will see then what our cases are and what's really going on. But we produce a book called Undeniable, or publish, I should say, a book called Undeniable every single year that tracks instances of religious hostility. That's everything from someone being threatened to be fired, to getting sued, to getting a demand letter sent from Freedom from Religion Foundation. And every single year we went from, I think in 2008, it was like 500 instances to 1,200 instances to upwards of 1,600. And it's just incrementally increasing every single year that we publish this book, whether that's kids being told they can't pray over their lunches, or a coach who we represent right now, who the Supreme Court decided to decline to grant cert for now. He was fired for praying at the end of a football game, which I know this is going to be squarely in your wheelhouse, Chris. So all that to say, I think that you have to do your due diligence to really understand what's going on with governments against the Christian church, big C. So
why do you think this is? Not the theological reason, and I know that this question's coming for you too. Why do you think this is?
Why do you think
Why do you think there's this antagonism?
Increased hostility?
Increasing hostility towards the individuals that are exercising a historic Orthodox faith centered on Jesus Christ.
I wish I had an answer for that.
Okay.
What I do know is for the gospel's offensive.
Yep.
It's an offensive message. And, Jesus speaks to this in the New Testament. He says this is going to divide, father against son, and households and families. Like, the gospel is an offensive message to say that I am broken, I am a sinner, and I have to be humble enough to say that, but admit that I need grace and Christ, and that he is the answer to that. And I think a lot of what I see is a lot of people who are just offended by that message. I did a debate, and I'll hurry up here because I know we have many you guys I really want to hear from. I did a debate against an FFRF attorney, and they're like atheists, and they really hate everything we do and everything we're about. And I have never seen, I thought we were going into like this intellectual, educational discussion. We're in front of a bunch of attorneys at the DBA, Dallas Bar Association. And I'm there with my case law. I think we're going to have an intellectual discussion because it's personal to me. These are my clients, but I don't have animosity against the atheist group that even comes against my clients. And he stood up and shouted me down. He was so angry and so aggressive. And it was just a very clear picture to me of what I'm facing on the other side. They're angry and they're offended that my client would dare not be willing to perform the abortion and get fired for it. Like, why would she not do that? And that's one of the things he yelled at me about. So I don't have a great answer for you, Nick. I just know that the other side seems very offended by us. We're just trying to live our lives. We're just trying to YOLO,
Yeah, exactly.
You only live once.
You only live once. So you got to explain it too. Okay, so it goes to you, Chris. Why?
Man, I agree 100%, man. The gospel is offensive. It's something that people have a hard time dealing with, that there's one way, you know, and yet it's in our culture and everything we do. You know, if I go to a store and I buy something that's $5 and I give them a 20, and I'm the register and you come into my store, I can't give you $2 back and go, hey man, this is what I believe you deserve back. You know, you're gonna be like, man, I need my $15 back, you know, or you're building a house. It's got to be specific, you know, you're not going to be able to get away. So people have a hard time dealing with trying to understand a God that there's a heaven and a hell, and, you know, who deserves and who shouldn't. And so I think that scares a lot of people because they don't know everything, but that's what makes him God, is that we don't know everything about it. Yeah. But so I think she nailed it on the head. If there's one thing, it's just the gospel is offensive to people, man.
Okay. David?
My turn.
Yep.
Here we go. So biggest thing for when I, you know, work with a lot of young adults and a lot of just younger men is that most of them are like, no, there's nothing wrong with me. Like they put up a facade, and the fact is like saying like, yo, I know you're dealing with stuff and let's talk about it. Let's go through the scripture and things like that. But even people who aren't Christians or who have never like been like heard about these things, when you confront them about them, it automatically, they feel like, wow, you're attacking me. Yeah. Big time. And not just that, but I've even seen that in my family. I've seen that in like just so many instances, especially this past year, you know, just working through so many different things. But that's kind of like the biggest response, I guess you could say, automatically. And it's not, sometimes when people actually want to hear those things, they actually start asking you questions. And so what I've come to find out is like just being a good neighbor and just loving on that person. And then when they're starting to ask you some questions, you start presenting the gospel to them. Right. But that's just what I see. Those are some of my experiences right there.
I'll add to that, you know, it would be one thing, I think, if a lot of my clients were going out and like preaching. We do represent some street preachers, the nice ones, but, you know, it would be one thing if they were like out there, like really challenging, but sometimes it's a passive religious expression that involves no one else that is generating animosity. I think my case, the Haugies are an elderly couple. They live in a retirement apartment complex. They meet in their apartment for a Bible study and don't push that on anyone. Right. And the rest of the community got up in arms about them and asked management to evict them. And they were sent an eviction notice, and we're fighting on their behalf right now. And so for me, it's hard because I just will never cast blame on my clients first. I think when you hear the stories, it's like, wow, even a Bible study behind a closed door is offensive to some people. And I don't have if it's $1 million question, Nick, if you could answer it for me, I would probably pay you.
And that's the crazy thing. Like we just talked about Lady Gaga. She gets up, and again, she's got the freedom to say whatever she wants, you know, to go up there and say, man, I love McDonald's. It's the best, or whatever. But it's crazy because when a Christian stands up and says something in the middle of their thing, then people are offended. You know, I remember Tim Tebow, when he would score a touchdown, he would take a knee, you know, kneel and just say a little prayer or whatever, and it would offend people, you know. And it's like, well, you're okay with somebody jumping in the crowd or, you know, doing crazy stuff. Yeah. But, you know, as soon as it's about Jesus or it's about the gospel, then it's offensive.
Yeah. And so I'm reminded of the idea from John 16:33 that you will have trouble in this world, that Paul tells the young Timothy, anyone who desires to live a godly life will be persecuted. And then the reality from Peter that says, don't be surprised by the fiery ordeal that comes upon you. So there will be trouble in this world, but we can take heart that Jesus has overcome it. And so we'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net, or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Wednesday, January 23rd, 2019 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us for the second hour for our Dallas and Minnesota market, the first hour for the other 45 states, as well as the world on Facebook right now that's watching. Hello, world on Facebook. So glad that you have decided to join us today. I am joined at the Millennial Roundtable we have Chris Avila here of the FCA. We've got David Fraga of Gateway Church, and then we also have Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. So grateful to have you all here. Thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be here.
And it's a roaring roundtable that we have here today. And so we're hoping that you're going to participate in our roundtable as well. We've opened up the lines, and we'll be talking a little bit. We've had some robust discussions earlier in the first hour. You might be able to say that we talked a little bit about what was happening in Washington, D.C., out of the March for Life that happened on Friday. Obviously, we're talking about the Covington Catholic School fracas that happened, where you had an individual, the viral video that misportrayed what actually happened, and then we're trying to figure out who's at fault here, or is everyone at fault, or is no one at fault? Was it at fault the Native American man, Mr. Phillips, banging his drum in there? Was he trying to incite? Was it very wrong? Was the media at fault for misportraying this and not being able to backtrack on it, or backtracking slowly on it? Was it the fault of the kids because of the disrespect that they were showing? So we talked a little bit about that. We'll continue talking about that later on during the hour. And then we transitioned a little bit, kind of seamlessly, it seemed like, but now that I recap, it doesn't seem nearly as seamless right now. And then kind of moved toward what Chelsey was talking about, some of the work that she's doing relative to religious liberty. And specifically, I wanted to know why is it that we're encountering so much difficulty right now? Why does it seem like the culture is increasingly hostile towards the historic Orthodox claims of Christ? And then we kind of transitioned a little bit into talking about just the offensiveness of the gospel. And being the Millennial Roundtable, it was kind of a robust discussion, simply just because many of us just have friends are a part of circles and spheres of influence where we do kind of feel this a little bit, where there's just this sense that individuals just largely think that we're bigoted, that we're homophobic, that we are hateful individuals, and they channel Lady Gaga with Vice President Mike Pence saying that that the gospel of Jesus is inclusive, it's not exclusivist, that he welcomes all. And so we kind of talked a little bit about that as well, and we'll continue talking about that here during this hour. Because Chelsey, I'm still a little perplexed by this, because like you were mentioning earlier, so recap it for us, there's just a certain hostility, especially in your world right now. We're living in this outrage culture, obviously. It seems like there's a new outrage every hour on the hour. It's just very difficult that we're living in right now. But then moving into that, like, it just seems as though the outrage largely, I mean, you think about Vice President Pence's wife, Miss Karen Pence, and her going to work at a Christian school, and how you have certain outlets that are saying that she's hateful, she shouldn't take this role. Then we have what happened at the March for Life. Really very little coverage that was actually made of this march in comparison to the coverage that was given to the Women's March on Saturday. Then we're starting to see kind of these racist overtures that are being placed upon these Catholic schoolboys simply because of taking a stance for what they believe in. And now we're starting to, and we're just starting to see more and more of this lately. Why do you think? And I'd be really interested in this, and we'll talk with these other two guys afterwards. Is there a reason why we're experiencing so much of this right now? Is there obviously there's a theological reason. We know that we're going to have trouble in this world, but what's the rationale? Is it just just the offensiveness of the gospel? Help us to understand.
Sure. So my first comment to you, Nick, which I mentioned before, but it's not just now happening. I think that the world is becoming more aware of it. But I work for First Liberty Institute. Go to firstliberty.org and you'll be able to really just go look at all of our cases if you're interested and see who our clients are and what all they've been through. But we at First Liberty publish a book called Undeniable every single year that tracks instances of religious hostility. It includes everything from someone getting sued, fired, like my clients, the Haugies, who they're elderly couple who live in a retirement apartment complex and were literally sent an eviction notice for having a Bible study in their own apartment. So it's not a joke. I mean, these are real instances and real people whose lives have truly been affected. People, we represent people who have lost their jobs, who the government has fined $130,000 for their traditional views on marriage. I mean, you name it. And the real truth of the matter is Undeniable. The book gets thicker and thicker every single year. We've now doubled the instances where previously it took 10 years to get to about 600 instances of religious hostility, and then it took another 3 to get to 1,200. So it's really increased incrementally, I would say, since about the year 2000. But why maybe our listeners don't know that, or you, Nick, who are, follow, I mean, it is your job to be involved in current events, don't know about all of these things, is that the media is not going to cover it. Right. Christians aren't, in the media's eyes, a very sympathetic person to put on the news. But the truth is, if you go and follow our cases, you'll really see that the outrage is there. It's not a surprise to us. We're living it and breathing it every single day. And I don't have a good answer to the question, why are people so offended by people of faith, other than what we said earlier, which is that the gospel is offensive, and that, people, it's really hard for someone who's not a Christian, I think, to wrap their head around, oh, you're willing to lose your job over your faith, or you're willing... They don't necessarily understand that just how integral faith is a part of our lives and our identity, that it motivates everything we do and say, and that because of that, we try to be faithful in a flawed way. We try to be faithful in everything we do and say. And so that's really my summary. But I think if people want to know more about what's really happening, you should get on our newsletter every single day and see what's happening.
And so newsletter's available at pointofview.net. We've got that information that's available. So Chelsey's in the, I guess you could say, I hate to delineate it like this, Chelsey's in the adult world to a large degree. Chris, you're in the high school world. You work at FCA. So help us understand from a high schooler perspective, is at a high school level, is there that antagonism towards Christians? One, how are you seeing Christians respond to that at that level? Help us to understand.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, too, going along with Chelsey is, technology and just our culture evolving. I think there's so much accessibility. There's so much, people seeing things. I mean, just immediately, just from social media, you can post things and, man, I was wronged, or this or that. And, you get people following you and liking you and saying, man, yeah, you should, and just builds. And so I think, those numbers, again, I think she's absolutely right on that. It's been happening for a while. I think it is increasing because of just technology, of, there's just kind of this accessibility that people have with technology. So I think with young people, I think a lot of it is this technology, and they're seeing things and they're trying to, there's this social cause and that they want to be a part of. And it's hard for them in church where I feel like, and we'll talk about this later, but it's like I feel like in youth group we've made it this just kind of fun, cool thing, and these kids want to be a part of a movement. They want to be a part of something.
So you're saying kids don't want to play chubby bunny, is what you're saying. Now, so David, help us to understand this too from your perspective as well.
Yeah, 100%. So I think the biggest thing is an identity crisis here. And so the kind of going along with Chris, they want to be a part of something great. And I think that's a big reason why a lot of people either leave the church, or why a lot of people are just like have such disdain against the capital C church, right? And I was looking at a statistic the other day, like 32% of young adults leave the church due to the judgmental aspect of it. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, the judgmental piece will be very interesting. We've got to take a break right now, but we'd love to hear from you. So you can call in 800-351-1212. Why do you think there's so much hostility towards the Christian claims? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Earlier this month, we saw two contrasting views of how to create jobs and raise wages. After Nancy Pelosi was reelected Speaker of the House, she gave a speech that outlined what she and her fellow Democrats wanted to do to help American workers. She said she would champion the middle class and all those who aspire to it. So how did she plan to do this? She said she would increase paychecks in rebuilding America with green and modern infrastructure. As I've discussed in previous commentaries, the plan for a Green New Deal was tried before without much success. Moreover, it is difficult to see how that will raise wages. The day after she spoke, the Labor Department released the December jobs report. Employers created 312,000 new jobs. There was also an upward revision of 58,000 jobs for October and November. This was incredibly good news for American workers. The unemployment rate rose from 3.7% to 3.9%, but even that was good news because about 419,000 workers joined the labor force and were rushing back to work. Also of note was the fact that manufacturers added 32,000 jobs in December. During the Obama administration, manufacturing employment fell by 210,000. In the first 2 years of the Trump administration, it has risen by 473,000 jobs. I will leave it to economists to debate what policies should get credit for an outstanding jobs report. It seems pretty obvious to me that cutting taxes last year and cutting regulations the last 2 years explains what is happening in the economy. The first week of the new year provided two different visions of how to create jobs, raise wages, and grow the economy. The latest jobs report helps us see what is working. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From SkyPass Entertainment, The Least of These, The Graham Staines Story. The Least of These, rated PG-13, in theaters February 1st. TheLeastOfThese.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. This is the Millennial Roundtable. Joined at the Millennial Roundtable, we've got Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute here, Chris Avila of FCA, as well as David Fraga of Gateway Church. We have been talking a little bit about the hostility of the culture against Christianity. And I guess I've tried to always think about the best. And so Chelsey and I go back and forth on this a little bit just because of the fact that I'm trying to think of the best. Like I'm trying to think that maybe it's not just hostility just against the claims of Christ. It really is just individuals that are acting, I would argue, unbecoming. They're acting like inappropriate, and the culture is just taking those cultural outliers and then projecting them onto the Christian culture. So, for example, it's kind of like, I don't believe every Democrat is a socialist. I don't believe every Republican is a neo-Nazi. I don't believe every Christian is a member of Westboro Baptist Church. But in the culture that we're living in right now, we just have these selective exposures where we're just selectively seeing these outlier examples, projecting that onto the larger contingent. And Chris, that's what I think it seems as though right now, because Chris and I, this is one of those instances where I wish that you could have heard the conversation that was happening outward when we were off air. But I was struck. I'm still just struck by Lady Gaga's comments towards Vice President Pence of just being very antagonistic towards him, being very judgmental towards him. But you know, I always hear you always hear hurt people hurt people. Absolutely. And you think about Lady Gaga's upbringing. You were sharing a little bit about some of that upbringing, and I mean, I didn't even know some of it. So
right, she came out with a documentary on Netflix. It's phenomenal. It's called Gaga 5'2".
Yeah,
and she shares of her upbringing of abuse, and man, it just rips your heart because you see her just depressed and battling with different things, and here she is on top of the world with her gift and talent in the culture. And I think that's what's happening is we're talking about what's the hostility is there's this false narrative of who God is because the culture, is hurt, and they're trying to figure out, like, why would God allow this to happen, happen to me? And they don't realize that there's choices. We have freedom of speech. I was sharing with him, with Nick, that I was dealing with an NFL athlete, and he was sharing with me he had gotten an STD. And he was like, man, my teammates, he's out with way more women, and why did God let me have this? And I'm like, whoa, like, God did not give that to you. Like, that was a consequence from a choice, And so I think I always tell young people, don't let a godless society or culture tell you who God is. We have to go to the truth, which is our Bible, which, things like that. So it's crazy, man. And so we need to pray for these people that have influence, and believe that, man, we can influence them, we can love them.
And David, this goes back to another point that I think is raised, especially, I don't know if any of our listeners have seen A Star Is Born. It's a movie that's receiving a lot of acclaim right now. It's a very gripping movie. I will say that it's a little explicit in certain components, and so I'm not encouraging you to go see it, but I am saying that it's a gripping movie that's up for quite a bit of awards. It's got a lot of Oscar buzz right now, and in the movie, there's a song. One of the title tracks on the soundtrack is sung by Lady Gaga. It's called "Shallow." And what I think is just so pertinent, especially in this movie and in this song, is it's asking a question that many individuals within our culture can answer yes to. And that central question that's being asked by Lady Gaga and then by our co-star in this duet, Bradley Cooper,
and maybe the world,
is are you happy in this modern world? And I think Chris brings up a great point, David, because it seems as though when you look at some of the statistics and you look at some of the examples that we're seeing play out and the tragedies that are falling before us relative to depression rates skyrocketing, suicide rates skyrocketing, unhappiness levels going to skyrocket levels, what we're seeing is that many individuals are answering no to that question. They're unsatisfied with where they are right now. Does that seem right, especially among the millennial generation, among where you're living and moving in your particular instance?
Yeah, 100%. I think social media has a lot to do with that. Absolutely. I think Chris and I were kind of touching base on this earlier, how if this generation is known as a fatherless generation. If they're not raising, fathers aren't raising this generation, who is? Pop culture. Yeah. And so you can go way back, man. I could talk about this for days, but it's like all about that. What is masculinity, for example? All those things. Why do people leave the church? Things like that. Why are they not happy? And probably about like 90% of the Twitter feed, if you go on Twitter and things like that, it's all about like criticizing someone, laughing or whatever it is. Like, I think a few months ago, there was like this guy who had a picture with his neck being all big, and they're like, oh, all these memes. And then the evolution of memes, which is like all fun and games. But if you really look at what a meme is, for the most part, it's making fun of someone.
And that goes back to and so this is where I'll argue pretty.
I didn't think I'd see Nick ever throw a pen
here's what I want to say.
over memes.
Does social media reflect reality is what I want to know. And somebody argue with me about this, because I'm of the contention that
Do you think that reality TV reflects reality?
No, I don't think so. I don't think anybody's keeping up the Kardashians. But like, I'm just saying that a lot of the instances, here's what I think. All too often, I think what happens on social media is a type of fear mongering, and fear mongering was so significantly accentuated by the media during President Bush's years, right? Because he was saying that he was fear mongering in order to get us into Iraq. He was fear mongering in order to get us into Afghanistan. He was fear mongering in order to make us do these certain things. And what I think social media does is it gives us these outlier examples and these little communities within the larger world that make it seem as though the world is this crazy place, and in reality, I just don't think social media reflects reality. But sometimes we use some of these examples, like, so for example, the pizza place that's being shut down in Indiana because the stand that they took relative to sexuality. Like, I just don't think most of the culture is that antagonistic. I think you're using an outlier example to project it onto the larger world, and I just don't think that. Okay, so you're going to argue.
Let's do it. Okay. I understand you have to make more nuances in your in your arguments, because you can't just say that, well, here's a crazy example and that seems like such an extreme that's not representative of the whole. But the truth is, at least we're mixing things up. So some issues are fear mongering in social media, but in the religious liberty landscape, which is where I practice law, with firstliberty.org, go to our website. I always say that because I want people to hear what's going on. We're not outlier cases. Okay. So let's say we get 50 requests for legal help a month with a staff of 12 attorneys. We can take one. or 2.
Okay.
Wow.
So like the vast amount of intake requests we get, there is not enough help or hands or volunteer attorneys to tackle the issues we're facing in the religious liberty realm.
Okay.
That is not fear mongering. That's a fact.
Okay.
And
Okay.
we're one of many organizations that do what we do.
Okay.
So there's ADF, there are all these other organizations, and we're all seeing the same trends. We're all seeing hostility and increases in hostility against Christians. I don't think you see it on the news. And I think what I do find a lot when I go to speaking engagements are people are really astounded by the stories. People are always very surprised.
Yeah.
And that's not their fault that they've never heard these stories before, but they always say like, is that really what happened? She really asked to not give abortion training at work and got fired. And we're like, this is the reality of the world we live in, that there is animosity towards people of faith and not just Christians. So I represent, we're a growing number of synagogues across the country. I represent half a dozen synagogues. And I got a video from a guy, one of my clients yesterday, and it is a video that's going around on a Facebook group that talks about the quote unquote invasion of Orthodox Jews into their neighborhoods and communities, that it's time to take a stand or they'll lose their houses, homes, and communities to this problem. And the problem is an influx of Hasidic Jewish members. So the sentiment, I mean, just to say that, bury head in the sand and say that there isn't anti-Semitism out there or anti-Christian perspectives. I think the more that people don't understand my clients or don't interact with Christians, the worse it gets. So a great example would be my Islamic client. They're going into a community trying to build a cemetery, and the community said, is this going to be a terrorist training camp? They asked my client that. I mean, I get so fired up. How offensive can you be? These are Americans, okay? They want to bury their dead. That's all they want to do. But the more that there's like a wall of separation and a lack of understanding of someone else's faith and faithfulness, the more animosity there is. But it is pervasive and it's out there, or I would be out of a job, frankly.
So that's interesting because it's almost like I didn't clarify my argument, and so I think you're right on that. But also it proves my argument right to a certain degree that it's not pervasive on social media, but it is a reality that's
being
So
there you go.
We're and then on the flip side, though, that I'll argue then on the flip side, so you're seeing a lot of this you're seeing a lot of unrest that's on the college campus right now. Well, is there really unrest on the college campus, or is it simply just in these hotbeds that there's always been protests that have been at Berkeley? There's always been protests that have been at the evergreen states of this world that are what G.K. Chesterton would say, that they're so open-minded that their brains are falling out. There's always been those things. But we would want to hear from you. And so that's a great question that I did not anticipate we were going to go on, but I like it because I'm throwing my pen at it. So does social media reflect reality? What happens online, do you think it actually reflects reality? And maybe the other question would be, the follow-up to that would be, do you think that why do you think there's increasing hostility towards the claims of Christ in our culture? And you can respond to us in one of two ways. Well, actually, you can do it in a number of ways. I'm going to highlight two, though. One is you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Tell us, while you're on social media, do you think social media reflects reality? Or why do you think there's increasing hostility towards the claims of Christ? We've got to go to a break, but when we come back, we'll answer those questions and take some of your answers as well.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Fitz. Welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Fitz. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. Then we got Chris Avila of FCA, and then David Fraga of Gateway Church. We have been talking a little bit about social media as well. Does social media, what's happening on social media, does it reflect reality? And then the kind of stemmed off a conversation that we were having about the hostility of the culture towards the claims of Christ as well as Christians as well. Is it as bad as what it seems to be? Or we're kind of taking the rain. We're taking the story of Lady Gaga that happened earlier this week and her antagonistic spirits and harsh words towards Vice President Pence, as well as Karen Pence, his wife, Miss Karen Pence, his wife, and her decision to go back to the school that she had she had taught at before. Teached at before. Sorry.
Did someone teach at you?
Chelsea's mad because she lost the argument.
I won half of it.
And so we have been, but we're also going to be taking your calls right now as well, relative to the hostility of culture, as well as to social media reflecting reality. And so we're going to jump on the phone with Anita right now. Anita, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks for sharing this topic. I'm in my 60s, and our culture has digressed so far from when I was a child. And I think part of the problems that we're having are, of course, we're no longer living in a biblical worldview. But when I was growing up, I was in a very dysfunctional home. I experienced different types of abuse, became an alcoholic, and I got saved. Now, prior to that, all the TV shows I watched had godly morals. And all the shows that I watched didn't actually particularly say Jesus' name, but that biblical worldview was in there. Mm-hmm. And so kids don't see that anymore. A lot of the things that they watch are talk about the breakdown of the family. They make fun of the dad. They're violent. You don't care about your brother. So I think part of the breakdown is that. The other thing is the shift in public education. I know statistically they say that when Christian students go to college, there's a large percentage, I think it's 45%, who come out unbelieving because our education system no longer has a biblical worldview and is actually antagonistic towards it and wants to break it down. And I grew up in a liberal state. I did not grow up in Texas. And when I was in high school, I had a science teacher who taught evolution as fact. Well, my brain is like an empty slate because I didn't know anything else. And so I took it in as fact. Now, I did get saved, praise God, and, a lot of those things. But a lot of the young people in our country are being inundated with a worldview that is antagonistic towards Christians. So I don't know what we're going to do. There's a lot of things that are influencing them, yet the social media has so much bias, and a lot of it is so contrary to the biblical worldview and to life itself. And so I think that's why we're seeing a lot of young people disillusioned, depressed, suicidal, drugs, alcohol, a lot of those things. And the answer is Jesus, but somehow without a revival, I just don't know how we're going to turn around, to be honest.
Mm. Well, Anita, thank you so much for your comments. You were touching a little bit on what David has shared a little bit about the culture. Specifically, we can't leave it up to Beaver anymore. I guess you could say that we now find ourselves sitting on a couch in Central Perk right now with our friends and aren't necessarily the greatest influences on our lives. You're wondering if I can come up with any more references that we're living with.
No, I'm not wondering that. I'm wondering if you can stop coming up with references.
Well, what can I say? We just have a modern family now that's very different.
Hey, nice.
Okay, so David, help us illuminate this for a little bit because she's right. It's very clear that we have that TV is a lot. I mean, just much more immoral than what it used to be, to say the very least. I mean, you didn't even see Lucy. Lucy didn't sleep in the same bed.
Yep, that's right.
Ricardo. And now it's just, dear goodness, I wouldn't watch TV. One, I don't watch TV, but two, I wouldn't watch TV with my grandma because it would be uncomfortable because I don't know what I would see. And then, so help us to understand that. And then, do you think there's a role in that to play, or is it more of the breakdown of the family? What do you attribute this to? What are some of the confluencing factors in this?
Factors, man.
Yeah. Help us to understand this.
Yeah, like I said, a big part of this is identity issues, and just the way a lot of these young adults are being raised. For example, I was raised in a Christian family, Christian home, all the things. Even went to a Christian high school all my life, and I left the church for 4 years.
Okay.
I just didn't really care about those things because my priorities changed in my mind. And the fact is, I honestly didn't know what it meant to be discipled, to walk according to Scripture, to walk according to those things. But I just okay, I can categorize things. I can set God in a box over here, but what I can control is I can be the captain of my own ship over here, right? And all that being said, a lot of it had to do with a lot of my influential friends who were like star athletes, like, hey, this is the way you're going to be successful. And there's such a desire and a drive to like, okay, what's the quickest way to be successful? Because if you're 21 and you're not successful making money doing this and then doing that, then you're messing up somewhere, because there's a reason why there's a rise of the quote unquote entrepreneur, right? Yeah. There's a reason. But the fact is, people say like, oh, you're an entrepreneur, so you must be very successful. Like, no, it's a grind kind of thing. And it's honestly like, you don't know when the next meal will be. But all that being said, is like, I feel like the media, the movies and the social media and all that aspect has to do a lot with creating that like fake reality of like, if you continue to do this stuff, then yeah, you're going to be successful, whatnot. But just all these people don't know what they're good at, don't know what they want to do. And on top of that, things that come like with social media and media, like movies and stuff, they're watching that and subconsciously they're being trained those things, right? So
yeah, I think it starts in the home, definitely. I mean, from divorce, from dads not being around, from parents that are working, and so these young people are being raised by the culture. Yeah. And so this is what's coming into their lives. This is what they're seeing as reality, you know, from The Simpsons. I remember The Simpsons was like, you know, Bart told his dad to shut up. And I was like, whoa, like, you know, Married with Children, all these different shows were huge in shifting the culture. And then the music. And I think, you know, people need to step up because they're going to sell stuff that people want and are buying. And so I think a lot of these protests and different things, we never hit the media. We never like, okay, we're going to stop buying, you know, violent music or over-sexualized music, you know, and so they continue to pour it out. I mean, think about this. They have that. I see these commercials all the time. I got little kids, so it's crazy. I have to like fast forward through commercials, but they have like, I think it's called Baby Bops, but it's, you know, songs sung by kids, like from Lady Gaga and Snoop Dogg and Katy Perry, and it's like they're already introducing it to kids, you know, rated R movies targeting young people. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, kids bops is what
kids
you're
bops.
Kids
bops.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And so this kind of goes back, Chelsey. I'd be interested because in your perspective, so David Brooks, big fan of his. He wrote a book called Road to Character, and he delineates between the Adam 1 and the Adam 2 person. He said that there used to be a day that we would give great attention to the eulogy virtues, is what he said. But now we're living in a world in which it's all resume virtues is where we give our attention to. So those resume virtues are good, but they're temporal in nature. So I want to make sure that I'm proficient in PowerPoint. I want to make sure I'm proficient in Microsoft Office. I want to make sure I'm proficient in social media skills. But we're not giving attention to, I want to be a person of integrity. I want some of those moral virtues that transcend a particular time period that are just good, honorable, the Aristotelian golden means, we would say. And so it seems like that used to be inculcated, those type of virtues used to be inculcated, brought into an individual through the family and through Boy Scouts and through Girl Scouts and through the church. But now we just have individuals that aren't participating in that. Do you think that's attributing to some of this? I don't know.
It's hard to say. I think there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
And so I think that throughout history, we've seen many phases where morality was at an all-time low or Christianity was an all-time low. And I think, 20s is a great example of that, an increase in a lot of rebellion. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of rebellion in that age. But at the end of the day, I think that the church right now is becoming more, hopefully, the church is becoming more authentic, so that those who are attending church are real Christians whose lives have genuinely been changed, who are genuinely living out the faith. And we know historically when the church is persecuted, this is a separate issue, but a little bit intertwined. Yeah. When the church has been persecuted, it becomes stronger. And really, I think like the fake fluff of churches goes by the wayside. And what we're seeing is like a return to Catholicism, which I'm surprised by our generation, is going from non-denominational churches to Catholicism because they want the structure and they desire something real and tangible from, we've been sold ads our entire lives as millennials. Like we see through the fake. And so in one sense, I think that those who are churched are more perhaps dedicated than ever to there not being this fake morality that's in TV. It's really about your faith. And then those who are unchurched are maybe more unchurched than ever.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So it kind of goes back to what Jesus said, that those, they fell away because they were never of us, right? And so we've got to take a break, but we'll be back, though, right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back on Point of View. Chelsey is triggering us in here with all these tales of things that we need to be aware of, but nevertheless.
The toddler talk.
Yeah.
These guys' eyes are so big right now with all the toddler talk between Chris and I.
My goodness gracious. I think I'm going to go back home now. But we're so glad that you've decided to join us today. We've been talking a little bit about the increasing hostility the culture towards the claims of Christ, and then specific, and a couple of kind of a tangential off of that. Does social media reflect the larger reality? We've been taking some of your phone calls, and you can still call in. We'd love to hear from you. Do you think that there's increasing hostility towards the claims of Christ and towards those who follow historic Orthodox Christianity? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. Or you can log on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And what you say on over on the onlines, on the internets, we'll try to share over air as well. But we'll take another phone call. We've got Larry in Indiana right now. Larry, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you for taking my call. I'm enjoying your discussion today. I think there's a value in the history here because we're talking about what's happening and what our opinions of what is happening. We need to go back. I think we need to go back to find out why and how it happened. And in order to do that, I think we need to go all the way back to we were talking about Marxism here, social Marxism, and the spread of social Marxism, specifically early 1900s and after World War II as well. And we know that social Marxism is designed, and in his own words, to destroy the social fabric of America. Everything from destruction of the morals to religion, to homosexuality, to all those things. And that's what's been spreading, and that's what's been more pervasive with a greater momentum in the last 50 years, since the mid-'60s. And I think the history tells us where we were, how we got here, and I think that holds a value in comparison to where we should be going in the future. And one of those Marxist values is destroying religion as well.
Mm. So what would you say? So what would Marx say? Where are we going then with this? Is it just going to a continuing fraying of the social fabric, you would argue? Yes. In combination with, we know that Marxism started out in the United States in our universities, Columbia, and then in California and such as that. Then it progressed down to our high schools. Then it progressed down to our elementary schools. And what's happening is they're now gearing the mind of the child to accept those teachings in junior high, high school, and in college. It's the final graining of that, so they come out and come into society, and also to go into our political systems as well, but mainly into our social systems. Mid-'60s, it was, well, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, but the mid-'60s, it was all those things that were going on in the 60s. You know, they used to say, if you can remember the 60s, you weren't there. And so I think that's what's happening. It's a total destruction of our social fabric in our United States, attacking the religion, attacking our morals in general, and that. So it's switched from an economic Marxism and Hegelism to social Marxism, and it's working. I think that's where we need to read those individuals, study that history, compare to the reality we are today, in order to determine the proper and positive directions for our future. Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things. So I think so. You bring up Cotter and change theory. Like the first step of I believe it's 8 steps of change theory is the reality that you have to create a sense of urgency. And I think all of us, and especially I think some of our listeners as well as I think all of us at the roundtable would say that there is a sense of urgency. We are at a point in which that. Literally up is down, down is up, right is wrong, wrong is right. Like in a relativistic culture, the strong man always wins, or rather not the strong man, but it could be the strong woman as well, always wins. The strong person, whoever, always wins.
That's right.
And so that's what we're facing. But here's where I think there's some things that we can take heart in, and some things that we can really be encouraged by. And I think it's encapsulated in this book, Nothing to Be Frightened of, by Nicholas Kraut, or Julian Barnes. Julian Barnes wrote Nothing to Be Frightened of. He says this very poignant quote that I think really does capture the spirit of our age when he says that, quote, it's not that I don't believe in God, it's just that I miss God. And I think we're increasingly living in a world that, one, they might not believe in God with their lips, but they miss some of the benefits and some of the attributes that come with it, right? Like I think with the women's movement right now, especially Me Too that's happening right now, it's not necessarily that people are clamoring to hear about Jesus Christ, but they are clamoring for some dang respect from the opposite sex.
I think, we talk about so many cultural issues and timely issues right now. And we always say, the answer is Christ. Our first caller was so right on that I do think that secular culture is looking for answers. They understand and sense injustice, right? And so social justice warriors are getting a bad rap, and, millennials are notorious for just picking random causes. But I think that they're searching for something to believe in. They're searching for something to fight for. And they're also searching for answers. We've talked a lot about toxic masculinity, which I know is a topic for later, but the answer is all in the Bible. I mean, the answer is in being Christ-like and being respectful. And I think we have the answers. It's just helping the world connect those answers to Scripture. And I know we'll talk about the Bladensburg Cross later, but it is a little bit, it's not a side tangent to bring it up and say, that is one of our cases. The Bladensburg Cross Memorial is a World War I memorial in the shape of a cross, where out of Bladensburg, Maryland, all of the mothers got together. They lost their sons overseas in World War I and said, we don't have a grave for our sons here. Let's build this memorial, and it will be our American grave for them here. And it's in the shape of a cross. We're at the Supreme Court. It will be argued at the end of next month because the American Humanist Society wants to tear the cross down. Not because there's some sordid history associated with it, not because there's anything offensive about it, other than the fact that it's in the shape of a cross. That is literally their argument. That the visibility of the cross in and of itself, that symbol is offensive to them. And I think, when we're in a culture that's the response to the emblem of Christ, it's a symbolic, it shows how important that symbol really is, and that, we're really in a fight to preserve that and say that the cross is good and meaningful and has a place in society and shouldn't have to be hidden.
So this is where I want to press hard, and we're going to have to come up on a break here
I
shortly.
knew that,
Nick. I want to press hard on this.
Told me.
So it's like the Sunday school answer, and don't get me wrong. Like I'm not trying to belittle the answer. I know the answer is Jesus, but right, give me more. Like, how is that manifested with toxic masculinity? Right, I know that toxic masculinity is wrong. I know the degradation. I know the sexual harassment rates. I know the rape statistics. Like, I know this stuff, and I know the answer is Jesus. But what's the hands and feet look like when you're doing that? So I want us to wrestle with that, and I want us to specifically identify some things. So specifically, if the answer is Jesus, is that truth that needs to be proclaimed with our words? What are the characteristics that we need to begin to emulate and teach to young people as well as old people? Because it's not just limited. It's 50% of women have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. 61% said that they can't speak up on it. That they haven't been able to.
And it's sad that I'm surprised it's that low.
Yeah.
Genuinely, I was surprised that it's that low.
It's 2 out of 5 or 2 out of 6 women rather have experienced a physical sexual harassment or rape, depending on kind of, and that's a significant number of people. And so, like, yes, the answer is Jesus to this, but what's the hands and feet? What does it look like for the public policy implications or some of our outworking of that? And so we're going to get to that in the second hour, and then we'll also take up Notre Dame. Notre Dame has decided that they're going to cover up the Christopher Columbus murals, and so we're going to try to figure out, and we'd love to hear your point of view as to should they be covered because of what he's done in the past, which was wrong, or should they continue to stand as a picture of what to do and what not to do? So we're going to tackle both of those little light issues in the next hour, but you stick around. We've got to take a break, and we'll be back right after this.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about Medi-Share.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With Medi-Share, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with Medi-Share. And they actually like Medi-Share more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of Medi-Share.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less, and they like it more. No wonder Medi-Share is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View on this Wednesday, January 23rd, 2019 day. During the break, I can report that God is good and he gives us good gifts, and that being this humongous stuffed Oreo that's a special edition now. Has anybody else heard of this? Has anybody heard of this before? We just had this just now. It's like this ridiculously stuffed Oreo. It's like a reminder of God's goodness and grace in this broken world, and I am exceedingly grateful for our good God. And I'm grateful that you have decided to join us today on this National Shelfie Day. So it's not Selfie Day where you just take a picture of yourself. It's Shelfie Day, which is you take a picture of your bookshelf. So you're kind of sending to your friends what's on your bookshelf. And so you can send those to the Point of View Facebook page if you'd like. You can put them in the comment section, and we would greatly appreciate it. I can't guarantee you Chelsey won't judge the books that you have on your bookshelf, but I think it would be kind of fun that you do.
People would judge my books. That's probably the other way around.
Is that Twilight I see?
Okay, calm down.
Who doesn't read Hunger Games and Twilight? Come on, Stephanie Meyer. It's so good. But we've been talking about quite a bit of stuff actually for this. The first hour we covered a little bit of what's happening over what happened in D.C. over the March to Life. March, where you had the controversy that was surrounding Covington Catholic School boys and kind of some of the antagonism and just some of the fracas that came because of that. During the second hour, we were talking about some of the difficulty and the increasing hostility towards the claims of Christ. And so why is it that the culture seems to be so hostile towards the claims of Christ? But then on the flip side, which was one of the arguments I was making, that social media doesn't reflect reality. As in, I just think there's a certain bit of social media that can sometimes give air to these outlier instances that would create fear, or to just not really represent the entirety of what's happening. So, for example, you often hear that all Democrats are socialists, or on the flip side, all Republicans are neo-Nazis, or for Christians, all Christians are members of Westboro Baptist Church. And so it was just, we kind of talked through that a little bit. And then what we were talking about right before we went to break, to a large degree, I think is interesting, just because we're starting to see how we're living in a world in which there's just a lack of morality, I guess we'd say. And it's not trying to be like, it's not me trying to be the kind of the Ned Flanders-esque from The Simpsons, right? It's just understanding like there's just certain virtues that we're just not emulating and exhibiting in the culture today. And we were trying to get to the root of that. And so, Chris, I want you to chime in on this, just because you're so much a part of this right now, because you're a part of an organization that's doing some work on this with FCA. You're really meeting with these high school students, and are you finding that high school students just don't have what we would see like the morality from the Leave It to Beaver days or from I Love Lucy days? Do you think there's less of morality now with individuals that are younger in nature? And then why do you think that's happening, if it is?
I think there's definitely the struggle. I love seeing just young people that are doing great things and having huge hearts. I mean, it seems like for me, I feel like this generation, we're seeing more and more kids. It was like when I was growing up in church, it was like, hey, take us to Disneyland, take us to fun stuff. And then these kids that I'm dealing with, they're like, man, we want to go to Africa. We want to go do something that's dangerous that for God, and we want to help people. And so that's, I love that. So I think there's a battle. I wouldn't say there's less morality. I think there's nothing nothing new under the sun, right? Yeah. So I think there's just that battle of that season of life that they're like, okay, what do I want my life to be about? Where do I fit in? David talked about identity, who am I? But I think there's this battle inside where it's like, man, I enjoy when I do something good. It feels good. It feels like the right thing to do. But at the same time, social media, we want to do crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And so I don't think there's more, but I definitely think there's just definitely a lot of voices, that are just coming at them through social media, through radio, through movies. And I think they're really trying to struggle and figure out, okay, who am I supposed to be listening to?
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of and David, I'll be interested to hear your comments on this. The idea, social media has made things a lot louder, right? There's a book, Addicted, by I think Adler is one that wrote it, and indicated that it's now it's an addicted disorder now, and 41% of Americans would classify as being addicted to technology. Even Pew put out a study that indicated that 31% of Americans 35 and above would say that they're addicted to their phone. They're on, and the way they phrased it is online almost constantly, and so it's extent it's shaping us. And what are some of the ways that technology is shaping us and changing us? What would you say, or what have you observed?
Well, definitely, I think, obviously, for mankind, the path of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And so technology, especially our cell phones, smartphones, we can do basically anything.
Oh, yeah.
And so having that constantly on us can actually even bring that anxiety, like, oh, I'm missing out on, or not just missing out, oh, I could make this a little practical, a little more easier on my task day to day, list, whatever it is. But yeah, definitely technology is shaping us in such a way where not having your phone, you feel naked. Honestly, you feel just off throughout your day. Something's going on. So,
and there's also this comparison. You tend to see somebody else, and then we applaud and we go, okay, well, that's what success looks like. And then when your life doesn't show up that way, then you become depressed. You start questioning yourself. You start struggling with different things. And so that whole technology, it like David said, is shaping people. To constantly compare, to constantly look inward, and we're seeing some issues.
So here's one of the things, Chelsey, I'll be interested in your comments. So we always hear about the fear of missing out. It's popularly characterized as FOMO. Yeah, the fear of missing out. But what people don't talk about, and which research indicates that it affects females more than males, is fear of being left out. It's not nearly.
Is there a difference?
Okay, so yeah, fear of being left out would be individuals that. Fear of missing out causes you to be a part of everything. Fear of being left out is you not being invited to things. And so, I'll bear testimony. So, when I was a little kid, I'd drive past some of my friend's house. You'd see some other friends that are parked at the house, and be like, "Well, I wonder why I didn't get that invitation." Right? But now on social media, all of that is brought to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you see all your friends' stories, you see all these pictures that are being posted. Why wasn't I invited to this? Do you think that's a contributing factor? One of the ways that's working its way out?
I'm not a technology scientist,
okay.
So I don't know. Okay, I probably classify as having both FOMO and FOLO. It sounds like.
I like it.
But I am a very, very big extrovert, and so if there is something going on, I want to go. Right?
Yeah,
I just am. I have a really hard time saying no to stuff. I've had to learn that as I've gotten older, for sanity's sake. So I could see that. I don't know that social media really contributes to that. For me personally, everyone has a different experience on social media, right? And so I would say I've tried to limit my social media to some extent. I hardly really ever get on Facebook. And then my Instagram is probably where I would spend most of my social media time. And I don't spend it comparing my life to theirs. I'm just not wired that way. Yeah. I'll post things that I think are fun or that people might be interested in seeing about my life, and then I let it be at that. So I think there's a way people can do it without it making them crazy.
Yeah, sure.
But I have had, lots of friends who've gotten off for periods of time or extended periods of time, because of comparison or whatever it might be. So I don't know. I just think social media is something that, like anything else, used in moderation, it's fine. It's not an evil in and of itself. It's, but if it causes you a lot of emotions based on what you're seeing, then quit following those pages.
Yeah, I always find it very ironic when individuals, especially on Twitter, I listen more than I actually contribute to Twitter, when individuals will tell us that they're getting off Twitter, and I'm like, oh, I think that's a sign that you probably do need to get off. But nevertheless, we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Earlier this month, we saw two contrasting views of how to create jobs and raise wages. After Nancy Pelosi was reelected Speaker of the House, she gave a speech that outlined what she and her fellow Democrats wanted to do to help American workers. She said she would champion the middle class and all those who aspire to it. So how did she plan to do this? She said she would increase paychecks in rebuilding America with green and modern infrastructure. As I've discussed in previous commentaries, the plan for a Green New Deal was tried before without much success. Moreover, it is difficult to see how that will raise wages. The day after she spoke, the Labor Department released the December jobs report. Employers created 312,000 new jobs. There was also an upward revision of 58,000 jobs for October and November. This was incredibly good news for American workers. The unemployment rate rose from 3.7% to 3.9%, but even that was good news because about 419,000 workers joined the labor force and were rushing back to work. Also of note was the fact that manufacturers added 32,000 jobs in December. During the Obama administration, manufacturing employment fell by 210,000. In the first 2 years of the Trump administration, it has risen by 473,000 jobs. I will leave it to economists to debate what policies should get credit for an outstanding jobs report. It seems pretty obvious to me that cutting taxes last year and cutting regulations the last 2 years explains what is happening in the economy. The first week of the new year provided two different visions of how to create jobs, raise wages, and grow the economy. The latest jobs report helps us see what is working. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From SkyPass Entertainment, The Least of These, The Graham Staines Story. The Least of These, rated PG-13, in theaters February 1st. TheLeastOfThese.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined at the Millennial Roundtable by David Fraga and Chelsey Youman of the First Liberty Institute. So grateful that you've decided to talk with us here for a little bit and listen in. And we've been talking about the kind of the hostility of the culture. While we're having we're seeing the claims of Christ increasingly becoming more not falling receptively on certain individuals, and we're also just seeing hostility towards the church. We were primarily using the story of Lady Gaga and Vice President Pence's wife, as well as just Lady Gaga just being very antagonistic, and it's just very interesting that we're finding in this culture today, because then we can even tie it back to the movie A Star Is Born. Star Is Born has this song called Shallow. It's a duet between Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. And what we find in the very beginning, I think, is a question that's being echoed in the hearts of many in our culture today. Are you happy in this modern world? And I think many of them are answering no right now. And so we've been talking a little bit about that and just some of the influence of our culture, just a wide variety of topics. I think like we've been all over the place right now. And then talking about social media. And so we're going to jump on the phone lines some more. And so we've got Pat right now that's calling in. Pat, are you there?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what you were saying last hour about the fact that they had shows like Leave It to Beaver and My Three Sons and Father Knows Best, those sort of shows. Now you cannot turn on the TV without it being a, quote, modern family. My understanding of the statistics is that about 1% of our population is LGBTQ, and yet we cannot have a single show. The shows I used to like to watch, I won't even turn on now, because every single one has added someone who does not have the same values as me. And And I also, even the commercials now, I used to, every time one of those commercials would come on, I would switch the station. Well, you can't barely do that now because it's on the grocery advertisements, the medication advertisements, the ball game. It doesn't matter what it is. You've got to have someone that's LGBTQ. I'm sorry, I'm not. And I don't support that lifestyle, and I really don't appreciate having it jammed down my throat daily. Mm-hmm. And so I pretty much don't watch the TV now. And I'm sure that's the trend for a lot of households because you can't go to a movie because there's nothing decent on. You can't rent a red box because there's nothing decent on. You can't watch your television. I guess you better just get more involved in public activities. The other side of that comment was years ago, my parents saved an article that was like a communist manifesto document that said, we will take over America without ever firing a shot. Is that not what they're doing already? They have infiltrated our schools, our legislature, which just made me sick the last election. Just everything about our life is being invaded. And about the public media, I don't use that either. I used public media in my job for 40 years. Once I retired, that got turned off because there's just too much negativity out there. People get so addicted to that, they can't have a conversation at their dinner table. They'll sit and play on their little device and send a note back and forth. I'm sorry, that's not my way of life, and I don't want it to be.
Well, Pat, thank you so much. Hey, and Pat, thank you so much for tuning in to Point of View. We appreciate it. We appreciate we haven't been squelched out.
Yeah, I love your program. I've been listening to it for quite a number of years. I don't contribute as often as I would like to, but that's because I have so many things I have to contribute to that it just doesn't make it every month. So thank you so much for the time and effort that you all put into it. It's a very informative and a wonderful show.
Well, count us grateful, and we are super grateful for you because we're trying to filter out and trying to help us understand. You know, I'm always captivated by what it says in 1 Chronicles 12:32. You have the men of Issachar, individuals that really were helpful to be able to navigate through the times of the age. They knew the signs of the times. And so that's what we try to do. We should try to be helpful to the extent that we can help individuals better understand the world and how we might be able to navigate through the world and take heart, because even though we'll have trouble in this world, that Jesus has overcome the world. And so that's what I think one of the things that I think is interesting, David, as we're talking about this, is there is an increasing hostility towards the claim of Christ. It just seems as though the idea of what Jesus said of make his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. There used to be a day that the chasm didn't appear as though it was so wide between earth and heaven, right? That we had to leave it to beavers that even though they weren't proclaiming the gospel, they were there was the rhythms of kingdom ethics that was prevalent in there, and there just seems to be more of a hostility today. Can you think of some other areas that there might be it just seems other areas it's just very antagonistic, or there's just really it's just very different from kingdom ethics, I would say. So like one of the areas we were talking about even too is like even in the dating world now, because we've got more singles than there ever has been in the U.S. right now per the percentage wise, and there's more people that there's a greater percentage that's living at home with their parents right now than has ever lived at home with their parents. Like it's just fascinating. So even that's kind of changing, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So going back kind of like to the dating sphere of those things, I know for a fact a lot of my friends, they download those apps, and we were talking about that earlier about those apps and like, okay, are they good, are they bad, whatnot. But I think that has a lot to do with commitment issues too.
Yeah.
I mean, even just like going back, shifting slightly back to social media where it all started, essentially these apps, and not just these apps, but also these organizations that are like, hey, let's help get you connected to people and whatnot and see what happens, right? But I just think there's like a big commitment issue because there's so many quote unquote fish in the sea.
Yeah.
And you could find the perfect person, and that's like the reality. Yeah, is like it's screened, man. It's screened and all that stuff. So, that's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah. It's just an interesting world that we're living in, Chelsey.
So, I have a few things just come to mind when you're talking. So I'm just gonna fire them off and don't know if they're cohesive at all. Here we go. The first being that I wonder, I have not seen a statistic for this, so I wonder if you have one, Nick, that really our generation is the generation of like children of the divorce rage from the 80s. Okay. And so really the divorce statistics increase significantly for people for our generation, and what impact that is having on a willingness to commit and to see marriage as a good and not a fearful or evil thing. And then the second thing that came to my mind, and either one of you guys can speak to this, is my husband and I we do premarital counseling at our church. We're really passionate about it. And someone told us once, and this is just so true of every couple we've ever worked with, they say one person needs to hear, there are two people in the world, one that needs to hear marriage is good, and one that needs to hear marriage is hard. And there's usually in one couple, there's one of each. Okay. Like I needed to hear that marriage was going to be hard and going to be work. My husband needed to hear it's good. Don't be a fraidy cat. So, like everyone's a little bit different. And I wonder how much of our culture really just has more of a fear of that commitment because of the way they saw their parents dealing with commitment issues and marriage. Maybe they didn't see that marriage was a good. And, in Japan, this is random, but I did a mission trip to Japan. Marriage is completely on the decline because they view it as a sad thing. They view it as something where like there's not a lot of connection there. So why would they bother to get married?
Perspective for sure. Yeah.
Yes. They're incentivizing marriage in Japan right now. The government is paying individuals to get married. And so because there's more people dying than there is children that are being born.
Well, the cultural explanation for that is that, in Japanese culture, there's an inner man and an external man. And the inner man is your thoughts and feelings and emotions. And you never share that. You only ever show your exterior man. Well, that's included in your marriage. And so like their parents don't talk about their feelings and things like that. And so I just, I don't know what you guys have to say about my random firing of thoughts there.
Well, so first let's address kind of some of the numbers. One, we saw an uptick. The last time we saw an uptick in the divorce rate as high as we did in the 80s, which the 80s, it was at the highest level, was in World War II. And so World War II, you saw this huge uptick in number of individuals that got married, but also a number of quiet divorces that happened. Since the 80s was the highest level of divorce rate we've ever had. And so that would have been during the time that millennials were just started, because millennials start in the 81. We saw a rise through the 80s, and then we started to see
no-fault divorce. Thank you, Reagan.
No-fault divorce. And so then we started to see it drop, and now it's dropped pretty significantly right now. Now we're at we're not at new lows, but we're at, from a comparative perspective, over the past 30 years, we're experiencing pretty low divorce rates, but that's attributable to a couple of things. One, you just have individuals that are getting married later, and so the marriage rate's also fallen pretty significantly right now too. And then two, and I think all of us probably know this around the table, you've got a lot of people that are cohabitating, and they're not necessarily getting married, and so the average, I think it's like 47 or 49% of couples that get married today have lived together before they got married. Cohabitation rates over the past 30 years have skyrocketed upwards of 800%.
Right, but not to be misleading about that statistic, because that does not contribute to a higher increased rate of staying together. It actually it contributes to a higher divorce rate.
Oh yeah, very clear. And then if you're a child of divorce, your divorce rate, you're 17% more likely to get a divorce. But we got to go to a break, and so when we come back, we'll randomly talk about marriage and divorce in the millennial culture. We'll be back right after this.
From Sky Pass Entertainment comes The Least of These, the Graham Stain story. When speculation mounts that a local missionary is converting locals to Christianity in India, a journalist must choose between his own ambition and the truth.
You can't make any mistakes. They have this law for a reason.
I know. We must pray.
Based on the true story. The Least of These, the Graham Stain story. Rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters February 1st. More information is available at theleastofthese.movie.
Jesus said you could find a person's heart by where they invest their money. We at Point of View could not be more thankful that so many demonstrate a love for truth and for this nation by investing in our common mission. Of course, the reality is our team, our truth team, is a small percentage of those who listen. And right now, as they say in sports, we could use a deeper bench. For those who have given, thank you. And if you haven't made that step yet, take one now. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Show your heart for our future. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Chelsey Youman as well as David Fraga. We were talking a little bit about millennials and this culture today that appears to be increasingly more antagonistic towards the claims of Christ, as well. Not only that, but a culture that's morally vacuous, I guess you could say, just doesn't kind of demonstrate and kind of exhibit some of those morals, regardless of whether you're a Christian, that have just typically been a part of kind of I would argue, healthy societies. But we've also been taking some of your phone calls, and so you can call in. That number is 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. And we were talking about a little of this, and then also we had some individuals on Facebook that were commenting as well and leaving messages in our inbox. And so a special shout out to Sherry. Thank you so much for agreeing with us. I always like it when I can find individuals that agree with me. It's few and far between, but nevertheless, I want to show my appreciation for individuals that are agreeing with me. But I think Sherry brings up some really great points in the Facebook inbox when she's talking about how, especially from the school perspective, there's just not inculcating, not transmitting some of those values that we really hold to be dear. And this isn't just an argument of that they're taking God out of the schools, which I guess you could argue they started doing that when they got rid of school prayer, et cetera. But I think one of the interesting things too is just that you just increasingly have more students that aren't necessarily proficient in history as well. And again, this isn't a teacher. Last thing I want to do is place blame on teachers right now, because teachers are increasingly being asked so much of them, and they're just, it's hard to figure out how much you want to cram in the day. But one of the interesting statistics that I mentioned in the daily briefing this morning, it was in regards to you had the argument about the mural, the covering of the Christopher Columbus murals at Notre Dame, and kind of the comparing and contrasting argument. One of the things the individuals that are for the covering of murals and the taking away of statues is that our people need to know history, and this isn't a good thing. Whereas the kind of the foresight is that they need to know history, and it's not good to take away history. One of the interesting things is the U.S. Department of Education released a study recently that indicated that 17% of 8th graders and 12% of high school seniors have been rated as proficient in history. So only 12% have been rated as proficient, and so you just have many individuals and students. But so Chelsey, it's just a very interesting time right now where the optimistic side of me wants to say that there's a lot of opportunities that abound in our culture today, and I'm grateful for individuals like Chris that's at FCA, as well as what David's doing, as well as what you're doing as well. We're all playing our own particular part in trying to figure out how can we, one, protect rights within the culture to be able to exercise our faith, but also two, to be able to inculcate some of the truths of our faith as well as the claims of our faith into our character as well.
Right. Well, I think, that's a big question, right? There's no one answer, but I think that the Bible obviously speaks to how we do that, and that is being open about our faith and living out our faith and not afraid to do so. And to speak truth in love is really, really the way that Christ says to approach the subject of him with others. And I think that, and at First Liberty Institute, what I see a lot of animosity and hostility towards believers, a lot of it comes from really a lack of understanding of their faith, why they're motivated the way they are, why they believe the way they do, what those beliefs actually are often misunderstood. And, once we shed light and are honest about our faith with others, it's up to the Holy Spirit to do his work from there in people's hearts. But the other can also be true, where I've had conversations with people who even understanding at a deeper level my clients and the things they've been through and why, and those belief systems still have a lot of hostility towards them. So I don't think there's any one answer, but I think it's the church's job to be the church and to be involved and not say this is a hard cultural issue or we're not supposed to be involved in politics. We should take a back seat. The truth is, being a Christian informs everything we do and say, and it should.
Yeah, so I think you bring up a great point. There's no silver bullet, right? There's not one thing in particular that the church can do. There's not one thing in particular that anyone can do to make all of these problems go away. These are to be expected, right? In the biblical narrative.
To care and love for your neighbor well, and your inner circle and your family first.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're called to do.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the interesting things that First Liberty is doing, specifically in the realm of the courts right now. And so you all have a case that you made us aware of beforehand. Share with us a little bit about that case.
Sure. So we are taking Bladensburg Memorial case to the Supreme Court at the end of next month. There will be oral arguments. So go to firstliberty.org and look up this case. I think it's really fascinating and very just telling about where our culture is. The case is about a World War I memorial that's been standing for almost 100 years. And a bunch of mothers out of Bladensburg, Maryland, lost their sons in World War I and never recovered their bodies. And so they didn't have graves for their own children to bury. So what they did was they came together and built this cross-shaped memorial, and it's supposed to be like the living grave site for their children. Well, of course, the American Humanist Society is very up in arms and upset that this memorial exists. And the question is why? Because it's in the shape of a cross. So I think it's important for our audience to hear a few things about this. First, that apparently the shape of a cross is so offensive to others that even when it's a memorial without any sordid history attached to it, these are really war heroes, true and true, that are being honored by this memorial, that the shape of the cross is still that offensive that they want to tear it down. They even suggested cutting the arms off of it. They said, well, the cross can stand. We just have to cut the arms off of it. And two, that the lower court ruling is in the same circuit as Arlington National Cemetery. And I think this is an important connection to make because if you've ever been to Arlington National Cemetery, it's a sea of crosses on grave sites and the Star of David on graves. Wow. And so if the lower court's ruling is allowed to stand, the message is that we have to go to Arlington Cemetery and desecrate all of those graves and take away the David stars and the crosses or whatever other religious symbols might be there. Wow. So the implications are very huge. I think it's an important case to watch. Again, go to firstliberty.org and look up our Bladensburg case because it's a symbol, I think, of this cultural divide that we're talking about, that what is so offensive about the message of Christianity that even a memorial shouldn't be allowed to stand, they say.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So help us, David, help us to understand as well from your perspective, too, among young adults. So Chelsey's feeling that antagonism. She's feeling the conflict that's being faced towards individuals that are, just simply a cross for trying to honor the dead. We're seeing this kind of antagonism towards it. What are some other areas that you can identify, that you can think through, that you're seeing there's increasingly hostility towards Christians and the claims of Christ?
You can definitely see sports.
Yeah,
that's one of them.
Really?
And I feel like, 100%.
Okay. How so?
You see, for example, just the divide of like either Kaepernick or just other, NFL means and people who are like, kneeling or praying for games, or even in high schools. I saw an article of like a coach just praying and then getting fired. So, for example, we talked about that earlier, but I kind of want to touch base a little bit of what Chelsey was talking about too, of just like how some people are not informed. And it's kind of ironic because we're like in an age of information where there's so much information at our fingertips, and it's just how like the intentions behind, like, for example, the murals that we were talking about. But why are they getting offensive over like these things of, like, for example, the memorial, the World War I memorial, and they have no idea, like, can they not even honor? And I feel like there's a lack of respect and honor because they don't know the intentions behind those things.
Yeah, it's funny. So I teach an intensive at Dallas Baptist University in Boston, and so we'll go up about for a week and a half, and students will be subjected to my lectures during that time. And so what I'm trying to say is students sleep really well for that week and a half up in Boston. But I went on a tour during one of the free times that I had. It was interesting because I'm just a kind of an information junkie, and Chelsey, I think you'll get a kick out of this. So we're talking about kind of the founding, talking about just the urgency during that time, and our tour guide is sharing with us, I think John Adams, a piece of history about John Adams, and talking about the freedom of religion that was been placed in there. But I don't know if it was a slip of tongue or what, but he began to use repeatedly not freedom of religion, but freedom from religion during his comments. And and then I followed up with him after that, and he doubled down on it. And so it wasn't necessarily a slip of tongue. He just kept on saying, no, our founders were very much advocates for this freedom from religion. I thought that, I pressed him a little bit, and I was like, I was under the impression that it was freedom of religion, and just identifying a couple of particular areas, and then even referencing going all the way back to Cotton Mather's letter, Cotton Mather and Roger Williams' letter back in the 17th century. He's like, no, freedom from religion. I was like, wow, that's a whole different world.
I have a historical take on this that we don't have time for right now, but if this is something we want to revisit, I can.
It's fascinating that, because we breathe it in the air here. Like to a certain degree, it's not necessarily that we take it for granted here in Texas, but I think Christians, for all intents and purposes, we typically tend to honor what Hebrews 10:25 would say, don't forsake the gathering together. And so we do have that kind of sense of, well, that's just crazy, stark wrong. But then on the other side, there's other segments and little communities that just believe that to be true. And so it's just very interesting that we're winning. No, but we got to go to a break. When we come back from the break, we'll talk more about that.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We've been talking a little bit about the hostility of the culture towards the claims of Christ. And so we kind of shared a little lesson from my time when I was in Boston, just the idea of when I was lecturing classes up there, and then I went off and did some random little tour because I'm just an adventurer, y'all. I'm like Dora the Explorer. I just kind of no, you weren't expecting that.
No.
Should have said Indiana Jones, but I don't think Indiana Jones would go on tour. But nevertheless, so I was on this tour, and the tour guide continued to double down on this idea of freedom from religion, and he was convinced, one might say, recalcitrant on the idea that in the Constitution it was enshrined the freedom from religion. And so, Chelsey, give us a little historical perspective on that point in particular.
Sure. I'm going to reach way back in history.
Okay, let's go
if
back.
People get bored, they should just call in and interrupt me because I'm just going to go for it. So it is true to some extent that the very first invention of separation of religion and government was Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is a concept that Christ invented, because before that it had been, supposedly, monarchies were theists and were deities. And Christ was the first to say that, render to Caesar what is Caesar's, and the church is its own thing. And so he was the first to really separate those two in that concept. And then throughout history, that just really became more and more evident that there's a dichotomy there that, our kings aren't really gods, right? And so that's kind of the Hellenistic history there, that, the Greeks intertwined the two and the Romans intertwined the two, and Christ really separated those. And then there were, after that, we all know in Europe that there were like state-sponsored religions. And so the Church of England is a great example of that. The Queen is the head of the church. If anyone's watched The Crown, which I have binge watched The Crown a lot, she is the religious head and leader of the entire state. And so it is true to say that when American governance was, I guess, invented, because it was really a democracy of its own, representative democracy of its own, that it was the first time there was really this separation. We're going to not have a state-sponsored religion anymore, that there's going to be a separation there. But what that meant was that the state was not going to tell people what church they had to attend.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's really, that's where that wall of separation ends.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing is, the left, and particularly in my field, the atheist groups, come out and say that there's, separation of church and state means that really, like, Christians have to hide, and that you have to hide your religion, and there's no place for it in the public sphere. And that's a bridge too far. That's not really historically what was meant to happen or occur.
It's fascinating. I mean, you even look at some of the historical accounts. You've got Cotton Mather and Roger Williams having correspondence back and forth in 1644. It's the first introduction to the very idea, the wall of separation. And I love it because it uses imagery. And for guys that are slow like me, I just need imagery with some of these big concepts. And it's like the wall of separation keeps the garden of the church free from the wilderness of the state. And so it's like you're protecting a garden in that extent. You're not having that, like you were talking about, Chelsey, the overreach of the government extending into the hands, into the garden. And then you see it even with Danbury Baptist in 1801 with Jefferson. But now in our modern world, we switched it to where now they think that the state can't be the garden can't infiltrate the state, and so they think it's to protect the larger culture.
That's not necessarily true, and the Supreme Court has acknowledged that. They said that the rule is general neutrality. However the government treats secular entity, it must also treat religious entities. So Trinity Lutheran's a Supreme Court case that talked about a generally available government benefit. Just because you're a Christian or a church doesn't mean you can't apply. That's discrimination in and of its own right. But also the Supreme Court has acknowledged multiple times that there's an appropriate place for government to acknowledge the important role that religion plays in our culture today.
2 years ago, right? The Supreme Court case that ruled in Missouri, for example, right? Something about the idea of this a particular church in Missouri having the ability to have funds for a playground park. And so it's like
Trinity Lutheran.
And so sorry. And so it's like it's like a public benefit, a public good. They're not trying to inculcate their values. They're simply just trying to provide a common grace, is what we would know in the theological world. And increasingly, I think that's just what our culture needs to do, right, David? Like, if a culture is increasingly hostile towards the claims of Christ, then we just need to show them the love of Christ, and hopefully we earn the opportunity to be able to share with them, specifically with our words, the love of Christ, right?
Absolutely.
Tangible, good deed acts Starbucks still are receptive. Like, I can't think of anyone that if you go to a Starbucks right now and you buy the person's Starbucks right behind you, that they're going to say, "You're a Christian? No, I don't want you to buy me coffee." No, I think they would be very receptive. I know I would be very receptive to someone buying me coffee. So if you're going to be down off 75 here in about 30 minutes, I need some coffee. No, but I like it. So it just places an emphasis upon the works of the faith instead of the words of the faith right now, right?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ways, if for some of our listeners, help them understand, like, what are some tips that you would have for our listeners right now relative to kind of the outworking of the faith in an increasingly hostile culture?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is like spiritual disciplines. I think like just also, leading by serving is one of the biggest things, obviously, but just discipleship in general. I think there's just a huge gap of just people who are in the church or not even in the church, but like who are just believers and trying to walk according and reaching like the older generation, reaching to like my generation, for example, and actually like saying, "Hey, and I want to invite you into my life. This is what a healthy marriage looks like. This is what it looks like to walk accordingly in your workspace, work in such a way where it's like loving and all that stuff." But I think there's a big need for that. And that is the cry of just this generation, something more than just mentorship is discipleship, honestly. And so the best thing that I could give tips is like, if you're someone of an older generation, reach out and to like, for example, if you have a relationship with a younger, family, just invite them into your lives. And so they can honestly feel encouraged and just edifying one another. And on top of that, even in this world that is going to be hostile, community of that is going to just grow. It's that seed and it's being watered, It's essentially what it is.
I think that's one of the great things. So Chelsey, I'll air your laundry. Or I guess it's not dirty laundry.
Sorry.
So I think one of the things that the church you go to does so well is Watermark Church here in Dallas, and that community is such a big emphasis at that church to really have families that have come together in this small group, and they're very much about the idea of if Christ is king, everything is his, right? And so there's a distinctiveness towards encouraging one another, towards considering how can I make Christ king in everything that I do.
Well, I think, and of course it is my church, so I really think they're doing some things right. But one of the things I think they've really have a grasp on is that there's no sector or sin or issue that the church shouldn't be involved in.
Right.
And so if there's an issue you can think of or dream up, they have a ministry for it. There's an adoption ministry, a foster care ministry. They have a abortion recovery ministry. They have sexual abuse ministries. Like, they just know that truly the answer to so much about sin in our lives or things we've been through is that Christ heals, and how do we go about that, and what does that look like? And I think that if that could be magnified on a greater scale. I was at a pro-life forum in DC last month, and one of the groups was saying, we've developed a church mobilization curriculum for churches to open ministries for not only for, really counseling women out of abortions, but even for women who've already had abortions, helping with that recovery. And he said it's just there's this huge vacuum in the pro-life movement that the church just they haven't stepped into.
Yeah.
We've got pregnancy resource centers across the country working their hardest. They're underfunded, overworked. They need volunteers. And where is the church? The church is silent on that issue.
Right.
And I'm just so convicted that that's really the church's place and role. And if the church was doing those things, it wouldn't have to be something in legislature we're dealing with. The church is funding the PRCs and opening their doors to PRCs instead of the PRCs having to seek government grants and getting rejected for those.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah, managing an array of responsibilities and expectations. What would it look like if churches begin to kind of help alleviate some of those difficulties that these women are going through? Well, we are so grateful that you have decided to tune in. Until next time, thanks so much for joining us.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about Medi-Share.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With Medi-Share, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with Medi-Share. And they actually like Medi-Share more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved And it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of Medishare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder Medishare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.